My name is Jolie. I'm 33, the eldest in my family, and if you ask anyone who's ever leaned on me for a last-minute favor, the reliable one. I live alone in a compact walk-up near the river, a place where the winter wind works like sandpaper and the snow makes everything look softer than it is. By day, I'm an operations manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. I solve other people's problems for a living, timelines, shortages, failed deliveries. People think that makes me unflappable. But on Christmas Eve, standing on my parents' porch with a bag of carefully wrapped gifts for my brother's kids, I learned that being calm is not the same as being safe. The door cracked open, and my brother Jacob filled the frame. Behind him, the tree glowed like a stage prop, multicolored lights flickering over polished ornaments. My mother clutched her wine glass, the stem pinched between two fingers as if she were afraid it might fall. My father kept his eyes pinned to the floor, a modest man performing a familiar escape. Jacob's mouth curled into a smirk I'd known since childhood. "No place for losers," he said, and the words hung in the warm air like a slap you absorb in slow motion. Time stretched. I could feel the straps of the gift bag biting into my fingers, the careful weight of each present I'd picked out weeks ago. Tiny sneakers, a science kit, a puzzle of the solar system my nephew had asked for. Somewhere behind Jacob, a speaker played a carol from another decade, elastic and bright, as if it could drag us back to a time when we pretended to be normal. I didn't plead. I didn't argue. I just heard myself say very quietly, "You're right." I turned away. Snow squeaked under my boots. I was aware of how the cold threaded through my coat seams and caught in my throat. I walked to my car without looking back. I had always imagined that if this moment ever came, it would explode. Voices raised, doors slammed, neighbors peering out through blinds. But there was no explosion, only a hollow, perfectly pitched silence. The kind that tells you finally reached the true end of a thing that's been ending for years. I set the gift bag on the passenger seat and started the engine. The dashboard clock blinked 6:17, the winter sky already deep. As I pulled away, the porch light receded in the rearview mirror, a single unblinking eye. With every turn, the presents glowed faintly beside me, like witnesses to my own gullibility. I had been so sure that if I showed up, if I baked the sugar cookies my grandmother used to make, if I smiled at the right moments, if I kept my voice small, something would soften. But the truth was clear in the cold night. Softness had been misplaced for years, replaced with a rut we called family. On the drive home, I let the phrase spool out in my head. No place for losers. It wasn't even original. It was the kind of cheap insult people keep on a shelf for easy access. But the words rearranged something inside me. They shook loose a timeline of small rescues, and those rescues clicked together like magnets. Late-night transfers when daycare ran over, camp registration fees paid just this once, utility bills topped up before the heat cut off. "You've always been the responsible one," my mother would say, smiling in a way that looked like pride but felt like relief. My father would pass Jacob another excuse with the mashed potatoes. Lost job again, tight month again, bad boss again. And me? I paid because arguing took longer than wiring money. I paid because I told myself kindness would eventually be recognized. I paid because I mistook transaction for love. Snow slanted across the windshield in long ribbons. The city was wrapped up, storefronts dark, side streets muffled into quiet. I turned onto my block and parked under a lamppost that dusted the car in pale light. For a long moment I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, my breath fogging the cabin. Then I picked up the gift bag, carried it upstairs, and set it beside my coat rack. The apartment was warm, heat clicking through the radiators. I made tea, cinnamon, and black, and watched the steam coil up and vanish. When the silence finally shifted from loud to bearable, I pulled my laptop across the kitchen table and opened it. The screen bloomed to life, tabs from earlier in the week, a spreadsheet still open, a folder labeled Xmas, and, tucked into my bookmarks like a habit I didn't question, each of the auto-pay portals I used to funnel money out of my life. Transfers to kids' tuition, a standing order for utilities, a recurring mortgage support payment that wore the fiction of generosity like a respectable coat. I scrolled through the history and felt the strangest sensation. Not shame, not anger, exhaustion. The kind of full-body fatigue that arrives when you finally understand the rules of a game you never agreed to play. People like to say that generosity is love. In my family, generosity had become a leash and love the treat dangled in front of the person holding still. I had been holding very still for a very long time. I took a breath and, one by one, I began. Cancel. The word was plain, gentle even. Cancel. I watched the confirmation banners bloom. Your automatic transfer has been successfully terminated. Cancel. Each click felt like loosening another knot I'd tied around my own ribs. I changed passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, updated my email recovery settings. I printed the past 5 years of transfers and stacked the pages, still warm from the machine. They smelled faintly like ink and something else, like closure, freshly brewed. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened a blank document and typed a title at the top. Boundary. No subtitle, no justification paragraph. Just a single word that made the air in my apartment feel warmer. My phone buzzed face down on the table. Jacob, you could have at least dropped off the presents. Kids are waiting. My fingers curled without touching the screen. I typed one word back, no, and set the phone down again. It began almost immediately. What's your problem? Then, a few minutes later, hey, what's going on? Then, a half hour after that, rent's due. Don't punish the kids. I flipped the phone over and let the screen go dark. For once, I wanted him to feel the shape of silence. How it doesn't answer to appetite. I boxed the presents and slid the carton into the hall closet. I didn't throw them away. I couldn't. The kids were never the enemy. They were the cover story. I closed the door and leaned my back against it until my breathing slowed. When I turned back to the table, the pages lay waiting, an archive of a person I no longer intended to be. By the time midnight curled its way around the windows, the city had gone to sleep. Snow had gathered on the sill, an inch of clean that no one had yet stepped into. I rinsed my mug, clicked off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway as the apartment settled. Calm. Too calm, maybe, but not empty. Something had shifted, and the floor under me felt steadier than it had in years. There is a moment in every story where the camera pulls back and the audience can finally see the whole map, where the roads actually go, which turns were illusions, what line you were tracing without knowing it. That night, the map was simple. I wasn't part of a family anymore. I was part of a system that depended on me staying quiet. And this Christmas, the silence would belong to me. I set an alarm for 6:30. New Year's was a week away. The weather report said the snow would keep falling through morning, soft and steady. I stacked the papers, slid the top page into a clear sleeve, and put the rest into a labeled folder beside the laptop. I didn't need a speech. I had all the proof I needed. By the end of this, I thought, he'll knock on my door. He'll learn the difference between a handout and a lifeline, between love and a balance sheet. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, the streetlight threw a blade of pale across the floorboards. My last thought before sleep was not a plan or a plea. It was a sentence that fit in the mouth like a key. By New Year's, this story will no longer belong to him. There's a trick some families learn without ever writing it down. It begins with a compliment, the kind that lands like a ribbon but tightens like twine. You've always been the responsible one. I first heard it when I was 10, holding a grocery list while my mother compared prices with a frown. Jacob was busy being a kid. I, apparently, was busy being a small adult. I learned the math of coupons before I learned long division. I also learned how praise can be a chore chart in disguise. If you grew up as the fixer, you know the choreography. When an adult sighs near a sink full of dishes, your body moves before your mind does. When the light bill sits face up on the counter, you fold it. A decade later, you pay it. In our house, I became a quiet machine for smoothing over. If Jacob dented the car, I found a body shop with a discount. If he blew through a summer job in 2 weeks, I ironed his shirt for the next interview. I was the first one up on holidays, the last one asleep after the guests left, gathering cups and scraping plates as if I could scrub us into a softer story. As we got older, the script didn't change, it just got decimals. My first internship paycheck evaporated into an emergency dentist bill that wasn't mine. Senior year, when my part-time wages barely covered rent and textbooks, I still sent $50 home because the cable was about to be cut, and my parents sounded tired. Jacob's misfortunes arrived with tidy envelopes. Short week, late check, managers out to get me, can't catch a break. My father wasn't cruel, he was a specialist in silence. He passed Jacob another portion of grace and passed me the bill without a word. People tell themselves myths to survive. Mine was elegant and dangerous. If I'm generous enough, love will come on its own. I was in my 20s before I understood that generosity without boundaries isn't love at all. It's a down payment you never stop making. By the time I joined the logistics firm, I had refined my skill set into a salary. I scheduled trucks like chess pieces, rescued shipments in storms, rearranged labor to cover sick days. My inbox called me dependable and my annual review agreed. On paper, it looked like power. At home, it translated into being reachable at any hour for everything money could patch. Just until Friday, Jacob would text, followed by a string of kid photos like proof of righteousness, open mouths with frosting, paper crowns from classroom parties, tiny hands in mittens. I loved those kids so fiercely that the line between them and their parents blurred on purpose. Love, I thought, this is what it looks like. You give, even when it frays you. What I didn't count was the interest, not on my savings account, I barely looked at that, but on my capacity. Every yes cost me something invisible, the energy to say no next time. I became a predictable river, and they built irrigation ditches straight to my bank. There are studies about this, nothing with my name on it, just numbers that sketch a familiar outline. Eldest daughters shouldering a private GDP of unpaid labor, women taking the second shift at work and the third shift at home, and in some families, the fourth shift for everybody else's emergencies. I didn't need the citations. My receipts were already printed in my kitchen. But thinking of myself as a statistic gave me a strange kind of mercy. This wasn't a unique moral failure on my part. This was a pattern. And patterns can be broken. The language of our house disguised obligation as virtue. Family helps. We look out for each other. God blesses cheerful givers. Those sayings can be true and still be used as tools. In our version, help meant I paid and kept quiet. Look out meant watch Jacob walk through exit after exit with a smile. Cheerful meant don't let your face betray the exhaustion of being a single pillar shaped like a daughter. When I finally tried to bring up a boundary, I can't cover the full camp tuition this year, my mother's pause did more work than any sentence. We'll remember this, she said softly. Not the favor, the refusal. The year Jacob and Kelly fell behind on their mortgage the first time, I sent money before he asked. I also sent a spreadsheet with suggestions, a budget where small choices could save them hundreds a month. He never opened it. He thanked me with 3 words, "You saved us," and a week later asked for grocery money because this system is rigged. I believed him. The part I missed was that I had become the system. There's a saying in operations that if a process is hard to follow, people won't. So you change the process, you remove friction. In my family, I removed friction by making myself the lubricant. I simplified their lives by complicating mine. I turned my paycheck into policy. I made myself inevitable, and what you make inevitable becomes invisible. Christmas Eve dragged that invisibility back into the doorway, put a smirk on it, and handed it a line. No place for losers. Brutal words have a gift. They pull varnish off the wood. I drove home that night and felt a decade peel up like old linoleum. Underneath was the subfloor I'd been walking on without looking. You are valuable when you pay. You are loved when you agree. You are family if you never run a balance with anyone but yourself. I thought of small moments that should have warned me. The day my car needed brakes and I delayed the repair because Jacob's electric was past due. The night I worked late to cover a winter storm reroute, then transferred half my overtime to them as a surprise. The morning I skipped a dentist appointment because it felt extravagant after paying for their emergency one. The time my father asked me to meet him for coffee, just us, and the conversation turned into a gentle request to be patient with your brother's temperament, as if temperament could pay a bill. When I got home from the failed Christmas, I didn't just sit at the table, I sat with the whole ghost of that system. I kept thinking of how often we confuse peace with the absence of noise. My family liked things quiet. Quiet meant Jolie had handled it. Quiet meant the lights stayed on and the rent cleared and the kids' field trip forms returned with exact change. Quiet meant the river was still flowing. But quiet also means something else. It's the sound a lock makes when it clicks. I stared at the list I had made. Presents purchased, shipping receipts, my neat handwriting next to teachers' names and sizes of winter boots. It looked like love on the page. It was love, in part, and it was also an invoice where my signature line was always pre-filled. I traced the letters of my own name until the lines blurred and reformed. Jolie, not a role, a person. You don't stop a machine by pleading with it. You power it down. You cut its inputs. You redesign the circuit so it doesn't loop the same electricity back to the same burning place. That night, I learned a new definition for a word I had avoided because it sounded harsh. Boundary. It wasn't a wall. It was a door with a lock, my lock, that I could use without apology. It was a way to stay a person around people who preferred me as a service. When I finally closed the laptop, the printed pages rested beside it like a strange family album. Not faces, but transactions. A history of my yes. I put the stack in a folder, labeled it with the word I'd chosen, and slid it onto the top shelf of the cabinet. Tomorrow would be a morning for small, irreversible actions. For now, I let my shoulders drop as if setting down a bag I'd been carrying for a mile longer than I knew. On the counter, my phone blinked again, Jacob with a line about disappointing the kids. I turned the screen face down and watched the snow through the window. Every flake landed where it chose. Every flake was whole. One by one, the streetlights wore halos. The apartment's hum grew soft and even. In that quiet, I felt the smallest, sharpest click inside me. The kind that says a door has shut. The kind that says there will be another door tomorrow, and I will be the one who decides how it opens. I set my alarm earlier, made a list I could actually love, coffee, confirm cancellations, breathe. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Sometimes a life turns not with a thunderclap, but with a gentle hand on a switch. Morning would test me. Morning always does, but I knew what to do next. I had been taught my whole life how to keep a system running. All that remained was to stop powering the wrong one. Morning is an honest thing. It doesn't care how your night went or what you thought you decided at 1 a.m. It arrives with the unromantic light of proof. I woke to the thrum of the radiator and a square of pale winter on the ceiling. For a moment, I lay still, waiting to see if last night had been a flare of courage I'd talk myself out of. It wasn't. The courage had cooled into something steadier. A list. Coffee first. The kettle began its small storm. The beans ground into a clean, forgiving scent. I drank standing at the window, watching a lone dog nose through the snow berm at the curb. The world looked scrubbed and blunt. Good. I wanted blunt. I opened my laptop. There they were, the automatic debits lined up like dominoes, each one with an explanation that had once sounded like love. Kids' tuition, monthly transfer to the school account I'd set up at Jacob's request. Utilities, recurring payment to that familiar power company with a name that felt like a neighbor. Mortgage support, scheduled on the 15th, tidy as a rent check, as if I lived in their house with them and owed it. Grocery top-ups, irregular but often, reliably, just this week. I clicked the first portal. The same pleasant interface I'd used 100 times greeted me with a cartoon checkmark and a banner that said, "We're making life easier." Password, 2-factor code, settings, autopay, toggled off. A confirmation window popped up as if it couldn't quite believe me. "Are you sure?" I read the sentence twice like it belonged to a different category of life decisions. Am I sure? I clicked yes. A soft chime. Your automatic transfer has been successfully terminated. The screen didn't burst into applause. It didn't offer a moral. It just moved on, like a clerk behind a counter stamping a form. Next, I opened the utilities account. The tug of guilt surfaced, a quick practiced rip current, but I'd already named it for what it was. Guilt used to function like a weather report in my family. A low-pressure system of disappointment will roll in around refusal. I clicked through the prompts, canceled, saved, another chime, another small, precise absence where a pipeline used to be. Cancel, cancel. I whispered the word at first to steady my hands, then to measure time. I changed passwords, set new recovery emails, turned on two-factor across every account that carried my signature. Each form asked me to confirm that I was me. For once, the question felt like more than authentication. Yes, I am. Thank you for asking. In between clicks, I printed the record. Each page warmed my fingers as it slid into the tray, fields of ink drying into neat testimony, dates, amounts, memo lines that now read like confession, kids' winter coats, camp balance, past due fee, emergency, again. I stacked the papers left to right, as if the order could tell a story to any future version of me tempted to forget. The ink smelled like every office I've ever rescued on a snow day. Toner and heat and the metallic tang of a room that works. Closure has a smell, I decided. It's this. Halfway through, a bank representative called me back. I'd submitted a request at dawn to reconfirm the cancellations and set stricter rules on transfers. Her voice was light and brisk, a woman who'd already solved 3 problems before her first break. I see you've ended several recurring payments and requested spending controls on third-party accounts. I can confirm those are in effect. Thank you, I said. A strange urge to explain rose in my throat. This isn't petty, this is survival, but she didn't need the story. She had the facts. One more thing, Ms. Hale, she added, and I felt the reflexive panic of bureaucracy, braced for an obstacle. We can also set an alert if any new recurring payments are added from your profile. It's optional, but sometimes it helps to have a message that says, "Are you certain?" Before anyone tries to make you certain. I smiled at my empty kitchen. Yes, please, I'd like that. Done. You'll get a text if someone tries it. And just for the record, you're allowed to make your money care about you. After we hung up, I let myself sit with the sentence like it was a cup of tea cooling just right. You're allowed to make your money care about you. It was a ridiculous anthropomorphism. Money is not a person, but the verb soothed a wound in me that had been tender for years. If I could not make certain people care about me without paying them to, then at least I could decide what the payments meant. My phone buzzed where I'd left it face down on the table. Jacob, you could at least drop off the presents. Kids are waiting. The old reflex, make it easy, make it fine, be good, flickered and died like a match in wind. I typed one word. No. There was a pause. Then the soft hail of messages resumed. What's your problem? Wow, childish. Are you seriously doing this at Christmas? Rent's due and Kelly's losing it. Don't punish the kids because you're having a mood. A mood. I set the phone farther away. The part of me that once would have crafted a careful reply, gentle but firm, lined with proof, malleable enough to leave him a gracious exit, stayed quiet. Explanations are a currency too, and I had spent enough of mine to fund an entire philosophy program. Let him wonder. Let him sit in a silence where the work he expected me to do stayed unperformed by me. That was the point. I opened the hall closet, dragged out a flat-pack storage box, and knelt on the rug. I lifted each gift from the bag slowly the way you lift fragile things you love, the science kit, a small sweater, the solar system puzzle with the glow-in-the-dark ring around Saturn. I ran my thumb over the edge of the puzzle box until I could feel the seam. The children had never asked me to carry their parents. They had simply delighted in a world where the lights stayed on and their boots fit, and school trips were paid as any child should. I placed the gifts in the box, layered tissue between them like siding on a house, and closed the lid. Not discarded, not displayed, kept, until I could decide how to deliver kindness without delivering myself. By noon, the apartment had shifted from task site to refuge. The stack of printed history sat clipped and squared. The laptop finally was warm on my palms the way it gets when it has done a long, specific job. Outside, the storm had stalled. Flurries drifted lazily past the window like the day was considering what to do next. My body surprised me. I expected the tremor of guilt, the melt of resolve that follows a hard call. Instead, I felt tall, not physically. I'm average at best. But something under my ribs had straightened. The apartment felt a shade larger, as if a wall had moved an inch. The radiator rattled and then went quiet, the space warming to an even hum. It's not dramatic to cancel a payment. It's a toggle. It's 3 clicks and a confirmation email. But that morning, it was the first real change I had made to my life's architecture in years. The messages kept coming, and when they softened, I recognized the technique as if I were reading a script I'd been cast in forever. Hey, what's going on? The kids miss you. You okay? This is unlike you. We can talk, right? He wanted me back in my role, one hand on the lever marked relief. I breathed. I wrote nothing. Mid-afternoon, I made another cup of coffee. Stronger this time, a small ceremony. I stood at the window while it steamed the cold off my face and watched the branch of the maple across the street shoulder its snow. In operations, we talk about critical path, the sequence of tasks that must be completed on time if the project is to finish when promised. Here was my new critical path. End the flows. Hold the silence. Let the system that depended on me stutter and reveal itself. I thought I might cry then. For all the years I'd taken my own needs to a pawn shop for quick cash to cover someone else's emergency. The tears didn't come. Relief arrived like a room with better oxygen. I closed my eyes and listened to the apartment breathe. At 5 o'clock, a last check. Passwords? Changed. 2-factor? On? Autopay? Off? Everywhere. Documents, printed, clipped, a letter-sized spine of proof. I labeled the folder with a black pen, boundary, and slid it, almost ceremonially, onto the top shelf of the cabinet. It looked ordinary there, harmless. Only I knew what it weighed. My phone buzzed one more time. Jacob, you've changed. I considered the sentence. It was meant as an indictment. I took it as a receipt. I set the phone down with a care I usually reserve for fragile glass and went to wash the coffee cup. The water ran hot, then hotter, until steam rose in a thin halo around my hands. When I turned the tap off, the quiet pressed in, soft and complete. No trumpets, no thunderclap, just a morning that began with small, decisive clicks and ended with a different shape to the air. On the counter, the kettle reflected the window's square of winter light. In that reflection, for just a second, I saw a person who could live inside her own life without negotiating the rent. I placed the cup on the rack and let it drip, a slow metronome marking a new tempo. New Year's was coming, not as a deadline, but as a milestone. If he knocked, he knocked. If he didn't, I would still have this, proof that I could stop paying for the story that called me by the wrong name. By Friday, the office had adjusted to post-holiday quiet, that soft lull where everyone pretends to work at full speed, while their minds idle like cars warming in the lot. I was halfway through reprioritizing a freight lane when a shadow fell across my desk. Before I looked up, I knew the shape of it. The tall, restless shift of someone who expects his urgency to deputize everyone around him. Jolie, Jacob hissed through a smile, as if he'd rehearsed the blend of brotherly and menacing. Heads in the pod lifted one by one, prairie dogs at a new sound. He put a hand on the back of my chair. We need to talk. My throat did that small betrayal my body reserves for childhood ghosts, but my voice didn't follow. Not here, I said. I closed my laptop. Outside, he followed me through the rows of gray fabric walls, past the framed poster about teamwork that no one believes, down the stairwell that always smells faintly like dust and printer ink. In the lobby, the receptionist, Kara, kind eyes, meticulous nails, caught mine. A silent question. I gave the smallest nod. I wanted a witness to our exit. The air bit hard when the doors opened. Salt powder dotted the asphalt of the lot. Plows had carved the snow into giant meringues. A truck backfired somewhere, and I felt the startle run through Jacob's shoulders as if he'd been caught. He spun to face me. "You think you can just cut us off?" The friendly tone evaporated. "What is wrong with you?" I kept my hands in my coat pockets. "I stopped paying your bills," I said. "What's wrong with that is a different conversation." "The kids," he began, a quick hand to his chest like he could summon their faces as proof. "Don't," I said, even and quiet. "Don't use them. They aren't an argument, they're children." For a heartbeat, winter itself seemed to listen. Far across the lot, a forklift beeped, a slow, reversing metronome. Jacob's smile snapped back into place, overbright. "Wow, look at you, Ice Queen. You owe us, Jolie. You've always been the one who steps up. That's your thing." He laughed, short and sharp. "I mean, honestly, I thought you liked it." I took the folder from my bag and held it between us. Not a shield, not a weapon, just paper. The ledger I'd printed. 5 years of recurring transfers, each line as steady as a pulse. I watched his eyes flick over the pages without seeing them. People who live on crisis don't read quiet proof. They listen for leverage. "I'm taking my responsibility back," I said. "That's what adults do with their lives. They take responsibility for them." "You can't do this." He stepped closer. The acid in his voice rose to a familiar pitch, the one that used to melt my resolve before it cooled again. "You're ruining us. I told the kids Aunt Joel would be here with presents. I told them we'd fix the rent like always. Do you want them to think you don't love them?" A small internal click. There it was, the weapon with the sweet face. When families want to force compliance, they borrow the faces of children. "I do love them," I said, "enough not to teach them that love means draining yourself dry for someone else's mistakes." The wind found its way through the buttons of my coat. I'd tightened my scarf. Jacob shook his head like he was shedding a joke that had gone stale. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. We stood in the brittle daylight, breath ghosting between us. Inside, movement at the windows. The familiar rumor of an office witnessing something it will later file under. I heard there was a scene. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt very visible to myself. He tried another entry point. "You think Kelly's okay?" "She's not. She's falling apart. The kids are confused." "Is that what you wanted?" "This is not about what I want," I said. "It's about what I will no longer do." His face shifted. He saw it then. The unmarketable truth that I wasn't bargaining. I had no coupons to give, no soft landing to sell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. A forklift's beep changed to the higher note of a truck door shutting, a neat practical punctuation. "You'll regret this," he said finally, low. He took a half step, too close. "You always come back." "You can't help it." "I already did," I answered, the same quiet I had borrowed from bank confirmations and radiator hums. I came back to my life. I turned and walked away, because the conversation was finished, because I could, because leaving is an action too, and sometimes the only one. The snow under my boots made a small, decisive sound. At the glass doors, I pressed my badge to the sensor, felt the click, and stepped into warm lobby light. Kara looked up. "You okay?" She kept her voice light but ready, the way women practice safety for each other without needing a script. "Yes," I said. "Thank you." Back at my desk, a few curious eyes did the look then look away routine adults learn to pretend is subtle. I reopened my laptop. The spreadsheet was still waiting, cells lined up like fields. I typed 3 notes to myself in a new tab. Document everything. Answer once if necessary, briefly. Hold the line. By lunch, my phone had filled with the weather of Jacob. Drizzle, gusts, false thaw, hail. A polite check-in. "Hey, let's talk." A guilt front. "Kelly's anxious and this is on you." A squall of insults. Selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, cold. I answered one message. Just one. Like a doctor giving a dose measured by weight, not emotion. Don't use the kids. He sent back a laughing emoji, then silence. I recognized that silence, too. It wasn't surrender. It was a pivot. That evening, at home, I laid the ledger pages on the table and sorted them into stacks by category: mortgage, utilities, tuition, emergencies. I put sticky notes on the top of each with totals I could barely force my pen to write without pressing through the paper. When you quantify a story you've been living by feel, the numbers draw a shape around your throat. I added a new section, unopened. It contained the practical things I'd tried that no one ever bothered to read: a budget template, a link to the school's financial aid, a list of community programs that cover winter coats without turning sisters into ATMs. I wasn't spiteful. I was thorough. Thoroughness is the dignity you owe yourself after chaos has had your name in its mouth for years. On the folder's spine, the word boundary looked both too small and exactly right. I slid the stacks inside, smoothed the tab shut, and put it back on the top shelf. Then I did a thing that felt ceremonial for no one but me. I wiped the table. Paper dust, pen impressions, a tiny comma of coffee I hadn't noticed. Gone. The surface was bare and clean, and in the gleam I saw the smallest, oddest image. A child version of me standing on a chair to dry plates while the grown-ups talked around me. I wanted to touch her shoulder and say, "You did enough. You can sit down." The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Immediately, it buzzed a second time with the same ID. I answered. "Jolie?" Kelly's voice was thin, like she was calling from the edge of a cold lake. "It's me." I sat. "Are you safe?" A pause. "I think so. I met with someone today, a lawyer." The words spilled in a rush, then faltered. He printed things, receipts, casino withdrawals, hotel charges, transfers that said kids that weren't. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. The city's nighttime hum lifted under her voice, or maybe it was my own pulse. "Okay," I said. "Okay." "I didn't know," she whispered, and for the first time I heard in her tone the pre-cry of a person who has just seen the map of her life redraw itself without her permission. "He kept telling me you'd handle it. That family takes care of what we love. He said if I loved the kids, I'd be grateful there was help." Weaponized gratitude. Old trick. "You don't owe me any explanation," I said. "You don't owe him any more silence." She breathed out. "Can I talk to you?" "Not now. Tomorrow. I don't know where to go." "You can come here," I said before the calculation part of my brain could assemble its spreadsheets. "Tonight, if you need." "Doors open." Another pause, the kind that rearranges the furniture in a room you can't see. "Thank you," she said, and the words landed without the code they used to carry. "I'll text first." After we hung up, I sat a long time in a quiet that didn't ask me to fix anything. I made tea, the cinnamon kind, the same scent I'd poured for myself after Christmas failed at the doorway. The steam rose, blurred my eyes, cleared. In the window's reflection, my face looked older in a way I didn't hate, less polished, more true. Across town, somewhere, my brother was constructing a new story in which I was the villain, Kelly the betrayer, the world an enemy. He would carry it to our parents, and my mother would call, and a familiar script would ask for an understudy. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not. The porch light of that life would glow like always, but I wasn't on that stage anymore. Families test boundaries the way floodwater tests a levee, first with a trickle, then with a shove, then with debris. The trick is never to confuse the pressure with proof that you should let it through. You watch the line, you shore it, you call it by your name. At 10, I locked the apartment door and slid the chain. The hallway furnace sighed. The city tucked itself into its after-snow hush. I put my phone on the nightstand face down, my palm on the cover of the boundary folder like a book I meant to finish, and turned off the lamp. The dark didn't press, it rapped. Somewhere in it, in the quiet that had once been the signal that I had fixed the problem for everyone but me, I heard a different sound, the low, steady note of a life that no longer owed what it could not afford. The pounding started like a bad drumline, offbeat, too loud for the hour, the kind of knock that tries to recruit the building into its urgency. I paused at the sink with a wet cup in my hand. It came again, rattling the chain as if noise could pick a lock. Through the peephole, Jacob's face swam into the fisheye, flushed, eyes bright in the way that says a story has already been written and you're being summoned to play your part. I undid the deadbolt, but left the chain. Opened the door only as far as the brass would allow. The hall was a stripe of stale heat and old paint. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "You need to stop this." He planted a hand on the jamb, forearm flexed, like he could hold the door open wider with performance alone. "You think cutting me off makes you some kind of hero? You're ruining my life." I angled my body so my shoulder filled the gap. "I didn't cut you off," I said evenly. "I cut the money off." His laugh cracked halfway through. "Cute. Word games. You always were good with paperwork." He leaned in, lowering his voice as if confidence were volume dependent. "You can't walk away from family. You don't get to decide that." "Watch me." Before he could answer, a voice threaded up the stairwell, thinner, urgent, a different music entirely. "Jacob, stop." He froze. The angle of his shoulders faltered, then squared again. Past him, 3 steps down, Kelly stood with her coat half-zipped and her hair caught in the collar like she'd dressed while moving. The light from the exit sign threw a green crescent across her cheekbone. "Go home," he snapped without turning. It wasn't instruction. It was habit. She climbed the last steps. "No." Her eyes flicked to me, not for permission but for bearings. Then back to him. "We're done." He pivoted, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" "I met with someone today," she said. "A lawyer." For the first time since the knocking began, the hallway air shifted, heat and drywall and a new, cool current of fact. Jacob blinked like a person adjusting to a harsher light. "You what?" Kelly lifted a hand, and I saw the edge of a manila folder shake once before she locked her wrist. "I know what you've been doing. The withdrawals, the casinos, the hotel charges, the transfers labeled kids that never reached the school." The words did not gallop. They arrived one step at a time, well shod. He looked at me then, the pivot as predictable as a clock. "You told her." I shook my head. "Didn't have to." Kelly pulled the folder from under her arm and held it up, not to display, not to threaten, just to exist. "I did," she said, "and I gave copies to the attorney. You can't hide it anymore." For a second, Jacob looked small, not young, small. And then the look snapped, and the old engine of blame revved. "This is what you wanted, isn't it, Joel?" He used the childhood nickname like a crowbar. "To turn my wife against me? To play savior?" My grip tightened on the door. "No," I said. My voice stayed low, but even. "I'm done playing." He lunged, not at me exactly, but at the space where the chain sat, at the idea that force could make the world behave. I stepped forward into the door, and the chain held with a tired clink. "Don't," I warned. I didn't raise the volume, but the word carried. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television murmured, a late game, an ad jingle, someone else's life continuing at the same pace. Jacob's breath came fast, white in the air. "You think you're better than me? You think this makes you righteous?" I took a slow breath and let the cold slice it into something clean. "No," I said. "It makes me free." He flinched at the word. Free, as if it were a confession of treason. "You'll regret this," he said. It was less a threat than a prophecy he needed me to believe. "You'll see what happens when I'm gone." Kelly's voice so soft I almost missed it over the hallway hum. "We already have." He turned to her fully then, baffled that the axis had shifted, and he wasn't at the center. For the first time, neither of us moved to comfort the confusion. He shoveled his hands into his coat pockets and rattled his keys like a full stop. Then he stomped down the stairs, each step too loud, like someone trying to make a point to the walls. The building exhaled. The radiator knocked once, twice, as if agreeing. I slid the chain and opened the door wider. Kelly stood very still, and I recognized the posture, a body that has learned not to make the moment worse by moving inside it. "You can come in," I said. She hesitated, polite even now, trained by crisis to check the temperature of a room she's already freezing in. Then she stepped over the threshold. The cinnamon tin sat on the counter where I'd left it. I put the kettle on. The element hummed patiently to a boil. We didn't speak for a minute. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was a clean table waiting for plates. I set a mug in front of her. Steam turned her hair to a halo and then vanished. "I should have said something that night," she whispered, "when they called you a loser." "You were surviving," I said. "Survival first. Shame later, if ever." Her mouth wobbled, then steadied. She opened the folder and fanned receipts across the table. I recognized the shapes before I recognized the numbers. ATM slips with the same 3 digits repeating, casino logos bright as flags, hotel names in generic italics. In between, the transfers, my transfers, labeled with righteous nouns. Tuition, coats, groceries, a lattice of good intentions laid over a hole. "I found the school email," she said. "They sent notices about return payments. He must have intercepted them. There were scripts, things he told me to say to you." She swallowed. "That you like being needed, that we were family, that you should be grateful we let you help." She flinched at her own words, then pushed on. He'd show me photos of the kids and say, "See, this is why Jolie will say yes." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Weaponized gratitude again, the old hymnal with new verses. I spread the papers carefully, the way I do at work when a trail needs to show itself without dramatics. "You're not the only one who believed him," I said. "I built a system where my yes was easier than my no. He just learned how to use it." She nodded, eyes fixed on a point beyond the table, beyond the wall, on the map unfolding in her head where roads she thought were paved turned back into dirt. "I met a lawyer," she said again, like she needed to hear the sentence out loud until it became a fact in the room. "Mark Dawson. He said he'll file for separation. He said the documentation helps. He said the way Jacob put your name on some of the online accounts without telling you, that matters." She glanced up. "He asked if you'd be willing to confirm the cancellations, to give a statement if Jacob tries to reopen anything as you." "I will," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "I've already secured my accounts. 2-factor everything. The recurring payments are gone." A small muscle in her cheek unclenched. "He also said—" She hesitated, then held my eyes. "He also said you don't have to keep helping me now, that this isn't your job." "It isn't," I agreed. I let the truth sit there, undressed, and I still will. Not him, you, the kids. If you need a couch tonight, it's yours. If you need an address to list for a week, it's this one. If you need copies of any transfers I made, they're printed, labeled, and in a folder called Boundary. I almost smiled at my own ridiculousness. I make good folders. Kelly's breath grabbed and released, a hitch that landed not in a sob but in a sound I recognized as relief trying to remember its lines. "Thank you," she said, and the words didn't carry the old invoice. They were just words. We drank tea. The apartment ran on its soft, even hum, the fridge cycling, the pipes murmuring, the ordinary symphony of a place that means you no harm. Outside, the snow re-began, thin flakes testing their descent. On the table, the receipts lay like a tiny city grid. We traced it with our eyes, not to punish ourselves, but to learn the route we would never take again. My phone vibrated, face down. A text lit the glass with Jacob's name, and then swam back into dark. Neither of us reached for it. The kettle pinged as it cooled, a quiet metronome nudging us toward next. "Do you ever think," Kelly said, "that maybe people like Jacob aren't trying to ruin us? They're just building a life they can survive in, and it happens to be a life that ruins us." "Maybe," I said. "Intent matters. So do outcomes. I'm done living inside his version either way." She wiped at her cheek, almost surprised to find wet there. I told him not to come home, she said, voice steadying as if the sentence might set. I told him I'd change the locks tomorrow. You can change them tonight, I said, or you can stay here, or both. I'll stay, she whispered. I pulled the spare linens from the hall closet, the same closet that now held a box of gifts I hadn't thrown away. I made up the couch while she texted quietly with someone, maybe Mark, maybe a neighbor to feed the cat, maybe herself in a notes app where you list small, brave things to prove they happened. When I tucked the last corner, she stood at the edge of the room, uncertain again. You belong in any room that's safe, I said. She nodded and sat. I dimmed the lamp. The room accepted us both without commentary. Later, after the dishes were rinsed and the receipts stacked and the door locks checked twice, I stood at the window with my palm on the cool glass. Across the street, a TV flickered blue in someone's living room, a rectangle of other people's stories. Headlights drifted by, quiet. My reflection looked like a woman who had stepped out of a role and into a life and was surprised to find the floor held. On the counter, the boundary folder waited for tomorrow's editions. A business card from a lawyer would slide inside it in the morning, a note about fraud alerts, a checklist of things people can no longer do with my name. I would not post about it. I would not gloat. I would not narrate my brother's collapse as vindication. The vindication was simpler than that. A warm room. A couch made up for a woman who said no to the wrong person and yes to herself. A silence that didn't ask to be paid. When I turned from the window, Kelly had fallen asleep, one hand tucked under her cheek like a child who finally got to rest. I set a glass of water on the table, turned the thermostat up one notch, and sat for a while in the low light, not to watch over her, she didn't need a guard, but to honor the room we'd built in a single night. Not a refuge from responsibility, but a place where responsibility had the right name. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, steady, honest. It did not try to be anything else. Morning arrived with the industrious hum of a city that had plowed its streets and decided to go on anyway. Kelly was already awake when I stepped into the kitchen, sitting upright on the couch as if sleep were a favor she didn't want to overuse. I handed her coffee and she held it with both hands, the steam threading through her fingers like a small private weather. My phone rang. Unknown number. For a half second, my body braced, old reflex. Then I answered. Ms. Hale, this is Mark Dawson. I'm representing Kelly. His voice was clipped but human, a tone I recognize from competent people with too much to do. She gave me your contact. I'd like to show you some documentation regarding your brother's use of funds and the accounts in your name. I glanced at Kelly. She watched my face as you watch a shoreline for a tide you need to be true. I'm available, I said. His office lived in one of those brick buildings that used to warehouse something heavy and now warehouse crises. The conference room had a cheap fern and a coat rack with 2 umbrellas that belonged to no one. Mark slid a folder across the table. Inside, printouts I already recognized from Kelly's kitchen table, and some I didn't. Screen caps of account dashboards with my name listed as authorized payer, notifications from services I'd never consciously signed up for, transfers from my accounts to prepaid cards that had been drained within hours. The casino receipts were garish, the hotel invoices precise, like rows of teeth evenly spaced. Here's the pattern, he said, tapping a page with his pen. He labels a transfer kid-related to justify the ask. If you route it through your bank, it lands in a hub account Jacob controls. From there, he portions off cash to other sinks, ATM withdrawals, or those prepaid cards. The school and the utility vendors do not receive consistent payments. Several of the kids' tuition entries failed. There are also online profiles where you appear as an added payer. Did you authorize these? No. The answer stood up straight and looked the room in the eye. Mark nodded once. We'll file to separate Kelly's finances immediately and seek temporary orders. For your part, I recommend you keep everything you've already printed, confirm in writing that you've canceled all recurring payments, and set fraud alerts at the bureaus. Change all passwords again. And if Jacob attempts to open or reopen any accounts or auto-pays in your name, notify your bank's fraud unit and me." Kelly's shoulders sagged in relief at the sentence I had been waiting for, too. A list of steps that had beginnings and ends. I pulled out the boundary folder. It thumped on the table with the weight of paper and decision. "Cancellations confirmed," I said. "Passwords changed. 2-factor on. I'll add the alerts today." Mark's mouth did something close to approval. "Good. And Ms. Hale?" He glanced up at me. "Whether you testify later or not, you do not owe anyone, including this process, your emotional labor. Facts will do." Facts. For years I'd paid in feelings. Finally, a currency I could submit in tidy stacks. On the way home, Kelly and I stopped by her apartment. The air carried the cold, stale echo of a life in transit, boxes half-packed, the last dishes drying on a towel, a framed family photo still on the wall out of habit more than loyalty. She folded clothes for the boys methodically, tucking them into a bag with practiced hands. I gathered the important documents into a separate envelope: birth certificates, insurance cards, the kids' immunization records, the letter from their school counselor that said the boys might need an extra check-in next week but were resilient and kind. "Where will you go?" I asked. "North," she said simply, naming a town 2 states away where her cousin lived in a square house with a porch she'd loved since childhood, just for a while. "Long enough is enough," I said, and we smiled at the same old phrase turned into something true. The week unfolded like a set of ordinary tasks newly sharpened. I filed fraud alerts with the 3 credit bureaus and requested free reports. I added a note to my bank profile that any new recurring payee required verbal confirmation on a recorded line. I removed my information from vendor accounts. I called the school to verify balances and asked them to flag any future payment attempt in my name with a courtesy call first. It all felt small and clerical, until I remembered that clerical work is what makes empires stand or fall. Jacob tried 3 times to add me back to things. I know this because my phone hummed each time with the alert Mark had set up for me. "Are you certain?" I felt the question settle in my ribs like a friend who asks good questions and then leaves if you say no. Meanwhile, Jacob's messages took up weather again. An initial thunderclap. "You ruined my family. She's leaving because of you," followed by drizzle. "Let's be reasonable." Then the frost of accusation. "You were never loyal. You love power. You've become cold." It wasn't a monologue, it was a circle. I answered once, precisely enough that even my future self would approve. "Kelly is leaving because of you. Do not contact me about money again." He replied with a laugh emoji and 3 words: "You'll regret this." I made dinner. Kelly read to the boys over video chat, their faces bobbed at the camera like moons. The couch became a nest of blankets and tentative jokes. She was still careful, the way people stay careful even in safety until their body catches up. But the carefulness had new edges, agency, not apology. At night she cried only once into her sleeve, quietly, the way women learn to cry if they need to catch a bus in the morning. By Friday, she had a departure time. We loaded my trunk with the large things and her ride-share's trunk with the rest. The boys sent a photo. 2 stick-armed snowmen in a yard I didn't know yet. A crooked carrot, 1 glove held up like a hello. "Soon," she told the screen. "We'll be there soon." She hugged me at the curb. No speeches. "Thank you," she said again, and it landed clean, receiptless. After the taillights disappeared into the gray afternoon and the quiet folded back around the apartment, I opened my laptop to do one last thing I had been avoiding because it felt final in a way I couldn't dress up. I closed the last shared account Jacob and I still had open from years ago, a joint emergency fund that had stopped being ours the minute it started being mine. The bank asked, "Are you sure?" I clicked, "Yes." A message bloomed on the screen with corporate cheer. "Your account has been successfully closed." I didn't take a victory photo. I folded the final statement into the boundary folder and whispered to the paper, "Done." Word travels faster inside families than truth does. Over the weekend, I heard the first echoes. Jacob had lost his job after a misunderstanding with his supervisor. A friend he'd moved in with temporarily had misunderstood the meaning of temporary. My parents were concerned that I had changed. Concern is a coat that fits any weather if you tailor it to your comfort. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and refilled my tea. Mark emailed to confirm service had been filed. He attached a checklist: locks, utilities in Kelly's new name, a new bank account only she controlled, password hygiene, a note about documenting any contact. He also wrote one line I copied onto a sticky note and put inside the cabinet door: "You are allowed to be unavailable to dysfunction." On Sunday evening, my phone lit with a photo from a number labeled Kelly, new. The boys were in new coats, too bright like a store ad, and they stood on either side of a lopsided snowman they had named with a joke too long to type. "We're okay," the caption read. "They asked me to tell you he's okay too." I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and felt something loosen, like a stitch pulled from a seam that never fit. The apartment hummed. The street outside did its evening chorus. Brakes hissed, a bus sighed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk with their head tipped back as if the sky could hold the sound. Jacob didn't call again that night. He might be busy revising the myth. He might be sleeping. He might be hungry in some new way. I let that be his. My vindication wasn't his undoing. It was my return. Before bed, I opened the boundary folder to tuck the closed account statement beside the rest. On the inside cover, I wrote in small letters, a private creed. Maybe loser is the name people give you when you stop paying for their mistakes. I turned off the lamp and stood in the window's dim square, palm against the glass. Snow had started again, the kind that looks like static until you focus and then resolves into 1,000 separate choices, falling in the same general direction. For once, I didn't feel like weather. I felt like a person inside a room she could afford. February arrived without ceremony, the streets stripped of their holiday pretense and left bare in a way I found honest. The lights were gone, the tinsel retired, and the sky sat low and gray like it had made peace with itself. I woke one Saturday to the radiator's steady breath and realized I had slept through the night without the old vigilant ear, the one that waited for a message it would then reshape into a solution. Sleep, it turns out, feels different when your life isn't standing on call. I walked to the bakery we used to frequent when we were small. The bell over the door rang the same friendly note. The room was warm, glass fogged, cinnamon and butter and coffee trading places in the air. Years ago, this smell would have knocked me sideways with nostalgia, then guilt. Now it landed like a postcard from a place I didn't need to move back to in order to love. I bought one sugar cookie and ate it outside, mittenless, grinning at nobody. Sweetness can exist without obligation. I had said that once as an idea. February let me keep it as a fact. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky was the color of unpolished spoons. Her voice carried that clipped brightness that means a monologue is coming with hard edges. "You've made things difficult for your brother," she said, as if I had drafted a new gravity. "He's not himself." I watched my reflection in the dark computer screen, my face calm in a way that still surprised me. "Maybe," I said, "now he finally is." We sat in the static for a beat where the script tried to land, the one where I panic, patch, compromise, apologize. It missed. She sighed, that long, world-weary sound some parents use like punctuation, and hung up without goodbye. I put my phone face down, turned back to my work, and felt the familiar ache flicker and die before it could flare. Guilt had lost its job. When work was done, I pulled the last box of Christmas decorations from the closet. The lid lifted easily. Inside, glitter and paper and painted wood waited like a family that had learned to be patient. I kept one ornament, a faded felt star with crooked stitches I'd made when I was 9, then drove the rest to the donation center. The clerk smiled and asked if I wanted a receipt. "No," I said. "I already kept what mattered, the lesson." She laughed the way strangers laugh when you say something truer than the situation requires and handed me 2 chocolate mints from a jar. On the way home, I took the long route, the one that passes my parents' street. The houses crouched in their winter poses, gutters stiff with icicles, hedges trimmed like sober haircuts. I slowed at the corner and looked down the block. My parents' porch light glowed the same unblinking glow it had that night on Christmas Eve, an eye that only sees what it wants. Their house looked smaller now, like a stage set after the play is over and the audience has gone home. The stairs still knew the rhythm of my feet, but the stage no longer needed my lines. I didn't stop. I let the car roll until the turn took me back into my own life. News about Jacob came in fragments, as these things do. He'd lost his job after a disagreement that sounded a lot like consequences. He had defaulted and then moved in with a friend who had a stricter definition of temporary than he did. He was still elaborating the myth where I was cold, Kelly was ungrateful, and gravity could be negotiated if you yelled at it right. I did not keep a ledger of his unraveling. I folded what arrived into a small mental drawer labeled "Not Mine" and closed it gently. Kelly texted pictures from up north. In one, the boys stood in puffy new coats in a yard that looked like a blank page, a lopsided snowman behind them with a carrot that couldn't decide between nose and grin. "We named him Unstoppable," the caption said, because 8-year-old Justice is simple and right. Another photo showed a kitchen table with messy pancakes and a paper crown from a cereal box. She added, "They asked me to tell you he's okay too." I stared at that line a long time, not to weep over it, though I could have, but to watch how it rearranged the air in the room. Okay didn't mean perfect. It meant breathing in a place where breathing didn't cost extra. One evening I cleaned the apartment the way you do when you're not trying to outrun anything. I watered the plant I had nearly given up on during the long season of hurry. Its leaves looked shinier, or maybe I just noticed them. I put the boundary folder back on the top shelf after adding 2 final things, the closed account confirmation, and a note I wrote on good paper because it deserved better than a sticky. "You are allowed to be unavailable to dysfunction." Mark had written that in an email. It had become a hinge on which whole doors had turned. I thought about apologies. Whether I would ever get one, whether I needed one. There's a version of me earlier in this story who would have said yes, absolutely. An apology means acknowledgement, means repair, means a place to set the bag of old hurt down so someone else can see it isn't light. But the woman standing in my kitchen at the edge of February knew something else. Some stories end quietly, not with revenge, but with peace. An apology can be a bridge. It can also be a toll booth. I didn't need either. I had a road. The thing about vindication, at least the kind that doesn't post itself online with confetti, is that it feels like weather you almost miss if you're not paying attention. It's a room that's warm when you wake up. It's the absence of a particular brand of dread. It's catching your reflection in a dark window and seeing a person who looks like herself. Not a role. It's walking past the bakery and tasting cinnamon without the iron aftertaste of obligation. It's a couch made up for a woman who said no to the wrong person and yes to herself. It's a folder on a shelf marked with a word you used to fear and now use like a key. I still pass the school sometimes on my way to work. Kids swarm the sidewalk in bright hats and the kind of boots that make them walk like astronauts. I used to look at them and picture invoices, tuition lines, field trip fees, breakfast to be bought. Now I feel something simpler, and possibly harder to explain without sounding sentimental. Hope that they'll learn, when they're ready, that love and money are separate languages and neither should translate to silence. If they don't learn it at home, maybe a future. Them will learn it at a kitchen table with a cinnamon mug, or in a lawyer's office, or in a quiet apartment where the radiator hums and a woman prints her own history so she can stop repeating it. The first Sunday of the month, I took the last box of decorations to the donation center. I kept the felt star. I hung it on the knob of the cabinet where the folder lives, a cheap galaxy looking down at a private archive. I don't keep it as nostalgia. I keep it as evidence of survival. Small hands, crooked stitches, something made out of what was available that has outlasted its season. That night, a dusting of snow made the street glow the way streets only glow in winter, when the color scale narrows and the quiet widens. I stood at the window with the lights off and watched flakes fall the way static turns to clarity when you stop trying to tune the station. In the glass, my face steadied. I didn't look triumphant. I looked free. If you have been where I was, if you have stood at a doorway holding a bag of gifts and listened to people who call themselves your family tell you there's no place for you, you know the peculiar ache of walking away without smashing a single thing. You know the seduction of the old role. You know the exhaustion that sits on your chest when you try to explain why you can't be the river anymore. Consider this, my hand on your shoulder. You get to build a life inside your own name. You get to lock the door. You get to love without being invoiced. You get to be the kind of relative to yourself that you needed all along. Thank you for staying with me through this. I wish you health and a kind of happiness that doesn't ask you to pay for it twice, and I wish your home the small, sturdy peace that lets families be families without anyone disappearing to keep the lights on. If this story felt like yours, or like someone's you love, I hope you'll share it below. Your boundaries, your lessons, your quiet wins. And if you want more stories told this way, Drama X, Documentary X, Vindication, where the heart gets its say and the facts get their proof. I'd be grateful if you subscribe. Your presence here makes the room warmer. Outside, a car passed. Headlights washed the window and, for a heartbeat, I saw myself as a silhouette on a soft gray screen. Then, the light moved on, and the room was left the way I wanted it, still, clean, and entirely mine.